He knocked on my door at 3 in the morning and needed shelter. I was just 15 years old, living in an isolated farmhouse with my sick mama. That sound, during the worst storm Tennessee had seen in decades, froze my blood solid. We weren't expecting visitors, especially not in the dead of night with rain coming down, like God himself was trying to wash away the world. If you've ever felt real fear, the kind that makes your heart nearly jump clean out of your chest, you'll understand what I went through that night. Nobody knows what goes through a young girl's mind when she's forced to make decisions that could change everything. The truth nobody tells is that sometimes life puts choices in our hands that even grown folks don't know how to make right. And that's how the story began that would change my life forever. My name is Sarah Beth Collins. I'm 70 years old now, and I watch this heavy rain falling outside with a different kind of tightness in my chest. Every time the sky darkens and thunder starts rolling, I go right back to 1970 when everything happened. I'm sitting here in my rocking chair, looking out the window, watching lightning cut across the sky, just like that night. The sound of rain hitting the tin roof is almost the same. Only difference is, all these years later, I see everything through different eyes. Back then, we lived on a small farm in Sweetwater Valley, deep in the Tennessee hills. It was a simple place, the kind that doesn't even show up on maps. Our house sat at the end of a dirt road, far from everything and everybody. We didn't have electricity back then, just oil lamps. Water came from a well about 100 yards from the house. Our bathroom? A little wooden outhouse off to the side. Every morning I'd wake before sunrise. First, I'd tend to the chickens, then milk our only cow, Daisy. After that, I'd go back inside to make coffee for my mama, Eleanor, who'd been bedridden for nearly a year. She used to teach at the rural schoolhouse, but sickness had been eating away at her bit by bit. Doctors in town said it was her heart, but I suspected it was more like heartbreak after my daddy disappeared. Yes, my daddy vanished. That's what everyone said, but nobody explained it proper. I was 12 when he went out one night and never came back. My mama cried for weeks, then shut down and never spoke his name again. When I'd ask, she'd change the subject. The neighbors, who lived nearly a half-hour walk away, would whisper among themselves. Some said he'd run off, abandoned his family. Others claimed he'd gotten mixed up with powerful people and had to disappear. There were even those who swore he was dead, buried in some forgotten corner of pasture land. After he was gone, everything fell to me. Taking care of the house, my mama, our little piece of land. I planted corn, potatoes, beans, a bit of everything, so we'd have food to eat. Whatever extra we had, I'd sell at the Sunday market in town. Didn't bring in much money, but it helped buy kerosene for the lamps, salt, sugar, things we couldn't grow ourselves. I never complained about this life. From a young age, I learned that crying doesn't fill empty stomachs or cure sickness, so I just kept going. Day after day, with hands calloused from working the hoe, bare feet toughened against the thorns in our fields, skin tanned brown from the sun. I was skinny but strong. Long black hair that I kept in a braid to keep it out of my way while working. Big dark eyes that my mama said were the spitting image of my daddy's. That afternoon, before the storm hit, I was picking tomatoes in our garden when I heard on the battery radio that heavy rain was coming. Old Mr. Johnson from the general store had warned me the week before that weather was turning bad. "Prepare the house, girl. It's going to be one of those roof-tearing storms," he'd said, while weighing out a half-pound of sugar for me. I spent the whole afternoon getting ready, checked the loose shingles, tied the pigs securely in their pen, put the chickens away early, closed all the windows tight, brought in plenty of firewood before it could get wet, filled every bucket and pot with clean water from the well. Then I set out old rags for the leaks that always showed up during these storms. Our house was old, made of clapboard with plaster over it. My granddaddy, my daddy's father, had built it more than 50 years ago. "Sarah Beth, come here, child," my mama called in that weak voice of hers. When I got to her room, she was sitting up in bed, looking worried out the small window. "Lock the door good tonight. There's strange folks roaming around these parts." "How do you know that?" I asked while fixing the pillow behind her back. "Little Jim stopped by this morning when you were fetching water. Said he saw Judge Williams's men asking questions around here, asking things about our family." I felt a shiver run up my spine. Judge Williams was the most powerful man in the county, owner of the biggest plantation, about 6 miles from our land. I never fully understood it, but I knew there was some old feud between his family and ours. My daddy never talked about it, just got a dark look on his face whenever the Williams name came up. "Don't you worry, Mama," I said, trying to calm her. "Probably just talk." But deep down, my heart was squeezing with worry. When night fell, the storm broke loose with a fury. I'd never seen so much water falling from the sky. The thunder was so loud it made our mud-plastered walls shake. The oil lamp swung with the wind coming through the cracks, making shadows dance across the walls. I was in the kitchen, brewing some chamomile tea for my mama, when she started coughing something terrible. "You all right, Mama?" I asked, rushing to her room with the cup of tea in my hand. She nodded yes, but I knew that face. She was hiding her pain so I wouldn't worry. I sat on the edge of her bed and started telling stories, like I always did on stormy nights. She always loved hearing the tales I made up, said I'd gotten her gift for storytelling. For a moment, I almost forgot about the storm outside, about Judge Williams's men, about how alone we really were. That's when I heard it, knocking at the door. Hard, desperate knocks. 3 sharp sounds that cut right through the noise of the rain. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the morning. I stood frozen like a statue when I heard those knocks on the door. Mama grabbed my arm tight. "Don't open it, Sarah Beth," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. The knocking continued, getting louder. Sounded like the door might just fall right off its hinges. Outside, the rain kept coming down hard, like the sky had split clean in two. The thunder was so powerful it made our little house shake all over. "Please, open up! Help me!" A man's voice called from outside. The voice sounded weak, like someone in pain. I looked at my mama, not knowing what to do. She shook her head no. But something in my heart told me I needed to see who was out there. What if someone really needed help? How would I sleep afterward, thinking I'd left a person out in that rain, maybe dying? "I'll just peek through the crack," I told Mama quietly. "Won't open it all the way." Before heading to the door, I grabbed the scythe that hung behind the kitchen door. Same one I used for cutting weeds, but it worked just fine for protection too. A young girl and a sick woman alone in the middle of nowhere. We had to defend ourselves however we could. I got close to the door, gripping that scythe handle so tight my knuckles turned white. I put my ear against the wood. "Who is it?" I asked, trying to make my voice sound firm, but it came out shaky anyway. "Please help me," the voice answered, quieter now. "I'm hurt. If you leave me out here, I'm gonna die." My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might jump straight out of my mouth. I glanced back toward the room where Mama was, but she couldn't help me make this decision. I took a deep breath and asked, "How do I know you ain't looking to cause us harm?" I heard a groan of pain. Then the voice said, "Miss, I swear on my mother's grave, I just need shelter. I'm bleeding. Don't know why, but I believed him. Still, I'm no fool." I adjusted the scythe in my right hand and with my left pulled the bolt on the door real slow. Opened just a tiny crack, enough to peek through with one eye. What I saw scared me half to death. There was a big man, soaking wet, with torn-up clothes. He was leaning against the porch wall, barely standing. Even in the dim light from the oil lamp I was holding, I could see blood mixing with rainwater running down his shirt. "Lord have mercy," I said without thinking. I opened the door a bit wider and got a better look. The man had a nasty cut on his arm and another on his forehead. His face was pale as a sheet. He looked at me with eyes that were begging for help. "What happened to you, mister?" I asked, still holding tight to that scythe. "I was attacked on the road," he answered, his voice getting weaker. "Please, I can't stay out here. They might come back." Who? Who might come back? He didn't answer. His eyes rolled back, and he slid down the wall, nearly falling. That's when I made up my mind. Come in, I said, opening the door a little wider. But you're staying in the tool room, and I'm keeping this with me. I showed him the scythe. The man barely had strength to nod in agreement. I set the lamp down on the floor and put his arm over my shoulder. Lord, was he heavy? He must have been about 30, strong-built, but now he was weak from his injuries. Even so, he weighed a whole lot more than me. Come on, it's this way, I said, guiding him inside. I took the man to our tool room, which was next to the kitchen. It was a small space where we kept farm tools and some seed sacks. There was an old straw mat on the floor that I sometimes used when I needed to sleep close to Mama on her bad days. I helped him lie down on the mat. Up close, I could see that the cut on his forehead wasn't too bad, but the one on his arm was deep and still bleeding. The man was shaking all over, his lips almost blue from cold. I need to tend to those cuts, I said. I'll go get some things. When I got back to Mama's room, she was nearly falling out of bed with worry. Who is it, Sarah Beth? Lord Almighty, tell me you didn't let nobody in. Mama, it's an injured man, I explained while gathering the clean rags we kept for when she took sick. He's hurt bad, bleeding. I couldn't leave him out there in this storm. Have you lost your mind? What if he's one of Judge Williams' men? What if it's a trap? It ain't like that, Mama. The man's too weak, can hardly stand. I put him in the tool room, and I've got the scythe with me. Mama closed her eyes and shook her head. Sarah Beth, you've got a good heart, just like your daddy. But sometimes a good heart lands you in a heap of trouble. I didn't answer. I grabbed the jar of corn whiskey we kept for medicine, some clean rags, and a bowl of water. I also took a handful of St. John's wort I'd dried last summer. My grandma had taught me those leaves were good for cleaning wounds and stopping bleeding. I went back to the tool room. The man had his eyes closed, but opened them when he heard me come in. What's your name? I asked while kneeling beside him. Thomas, he answered, voice weak. Thomas Miller. Miller. Same last name as my daddy. But that didn't mean anything special. Half the folks in this county were either Millers or Johnsons. This is gonna sting something fierce, I warned, wetting a rag with whiskey. When I pressed the rag to the cut on his arm, Thomas bit his lip to keep from yelling out. I could tell he was strong as an ox, because that must have hurt something awful. Who did this to you? I asked while cleaning away the blood. He took a deep breath before answering. Some men, on the road, wanted my money. I didn't quite believe that. Road bandits usually don't let their victims get away, and if they wanted money, why didn't they just take it? But I kept quiet, just kept tending to his wounds. The cut on his arm was deep, but I could see it hadn't hit any big veins, or else he'd have bled out by now. After cleaning it good with the whiskey, I put the crushed St. John's wort leaves on top and tied it up with a clean rag. You remind me of someone, Thomas said suddenly, looking at me strange. It ain't ma'am, mister. I'm only 15, I replied, not meeting his eyes. And you need to rest. We can talk more tomorrow. I picked up the lamp and stood. Thank you, he whispered. The Lord will reward you for this kindness. I didn't answer. I left the tool room and locked the door from the outside. Wasn't being mean, just careful. He might be telling the truth, but he might be lying too. And I had my sick Mama to protect. I went back to Mama's room, where she looked at me with worried eyes. Well? I cleaned his cuts. He says his name is Thomas Miller and that he was attacked on the road. Miller? Mama asked, and I noticed she went even paler. What's he look like? I described the man, tall, strong-built, black hair on the longish side, stubble on his face, dark eyes, probably around 30 years old. Mama got real quiet, thinking. I locked the door from the outside, I said to reassure her. And tomorrow, when the rain stops, he'll be on his way. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. This man had a secret. And something told me that secret had to do with our family. Come lie down here beside me, Mama asked, patting the bed. "Tonight we'll sleep together." I lay down next to her, too tired to change my clothes. We listened to the rain beating on the roof and the thunder that was moving farther away. Before falling asleep, I thought about the stranger now staying in our tool room. Who was he really? Why was he attacked? And why did I feel like he wasn't telling the whole truth? Sleep came before answers did, but something told me our lives wouldn't ever be the same after this night. I woke up with the first rooster crow. For just a second, I forgot everything that happened the night before. Then, in a flash, I remembered the injured man in our tool room. I got up real careful so I wouldn't wake Mama, who was sleeping sounder than she had in many days. The day had dawned clear, like it always does after a big storm. The sky was blue without a single cloud, as if last night's downpour had been nothing but a bad dream. I went to the kitchen, lit the wood stove, and put water on for coffee. While waiting for it to boil, I kept looking at that locked door to the tool room. Was the man still in there? Or had he somehow gotten that door open and run off during the night? I gathered my courage and walked over, pressed my ear against the wood, and heard strong breathing. Well, at least he was alive. I took the key I'd kept in my dress pocket and opened the door real slow and quiet. Thomas was sleeping on the straw mat, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The bandage I'd put on his arm had a bloodstain, but it didn't look any worse than before. I stood watching him for a while, wondering how a man so strong had ended up in this situation. He had working hands, calloused with short nails, didn't look like no criminal or vagabond. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. I jumped back. "Good morning," he said, his voice much better than the night before. "Sorry if I startled you." "You didn't startle me none," I lied, feeling my heart racing. "Just came to see if you're doing any better." He tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "I am, thanks to the Lord and to you." He looked around at the small, cramped tool room. "Don't want to be a burden. Soon as I'm feeling stronger, I'll be on my way." "Made some coffee," I said, not knowing quite what else to say. "Would you like a cup?" He smiled, and I noticed he had a nice smile, despite his bruised-up face. "I surely would, and no need to call me Mister. I ain't that old." I went back to the kitchen, feeling my face flush warm. I poured 2 cups of coffee, grabbed a piece of cornbread left from the day before, and carried it all on an old wooden tray. Thomas ate like a man who hadn't seen food in days. Wolfed down that cornbread and drank the coffee in big gulps. "This is mighty fine," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Been a long time since I had home cooking like this." "You live far from here?" I asked, sitting in the doorway of the tool room. He hesitated before answering. "I'm from over Knoxville way, but I've been on the road a spell." "And what were you doing around these parts? This ain't the way to anywhere." Thomas set his empty cup on the floor. "Came to visit some kin, but reckon I got lost on the road, and then that storm hit. Next thing I knew, I had these men surrounding me." Something seemed off about his story. Nobody ends up in Sweetwater Valley by mistake, especially not on a stormy night. But before I could ask anything more, I heard Mama's voice calling me. "Sarah Beth! Sarah Beth! Come here!" "Be right back," I told Thomas, picking up the tray. I found Mama sitting up in bed, her hair all a mess, worry written all over her face. "Where's that man?" she asked the minute I walked in. "Still in the tool room. I gave him coffee and a piece of cornbread." "Did you talk to him? What did he say?" I told her about our conversation, and Mama just stared off into nothing like she was thinking about something far away. "Sarah Beth," she said, grabbing my hand hard, "be careful. We don't know this man from Adam." "I know, Mama. I keep that scythe close by." I helped Mama get up out of bed. She was weaker than normal, her skin hot with fever. I gave her the medicine that the pharmacist in town had sent, then helped her sit in the rocking chair in the front room. "I'm going outside to check on things after the storm," I said, grabbing an old straw hat. "You stay right here, all right? I'll be back shortly." I went out through the kitchen door, avoiding passing by the tool room where Thomas was. The yard was a mess. There were fallen branches everywhere. The vegetable garden was half ruined from the force of the water, and the chicken coop had lost part of its roof. I sighed, thinking about all the work ahead of me. I started gathering the bigger branches when I heard a noise behind me. I spun around, startled. It was Thomas. He'd come out of the tool room and was now standing there, leaning against the kitchen door. He looked a bit better, despite his bandaged arm. "Can I help?" he asked. "You're hurt," I replied. "Should be resting." Rested enough, and I don't cotton to sitting still while someone else is working. I didn't say anything. Part of me still didn't trust him, but another part was relieved to have the help. There was a heap of work to do, and I was just one person. "All right," I said, handing him a branch broom. "You can start sweeping them sticks over to that corner." We worked in silence for a while. Even with his injured arm, Thomas was a big help. He worked fast and knew what needed doing without me having to explain. It was clear he knew farm life well. "You live here alone with your mama?" he asked after some time. "Yep, since my daddy disappeared, about 3 years back." "Disappeared how?" I stopped working and looked at him. Why was he so interested in my family? "He went out one night and never came back," I answered, not giving details. "You said your name is Miller. You know many folks around these parts?" It was his turn to look suspicious. "A few. Why?" "No reason. Just that my daddy was a Miller, too. John Miller." Thomas stood stock still, the broom in his hand, looking at me strange. "John Miller? From the Crescent Farm?" My heart skipped a beat. Crescent Farm was the old name for our land, before we were left with just this little piece of property. "You knew my daddy?" Before he could answer, we heard a scream coming from inside the house. It was Mama. I dropped everything and ran, with Thomas right behind me. I found Mama fallen on the floor of the front room near the rocking chair. She must have tried to stand up and couldn't manage it. I knelt beside her. "Mama, what happened? Are you all right?" She pointed toward the door, trembling. I looked in that direction and saw Thomas standing there, concern on his face. "You!" Mama said, her voice weak but full of anger. "What are you doing here?" I was confused. Mama was talking like she knew Thomas, but how could that be when she'd never seen him before? "Mrs. Eleanor," Thomas said, taking a step forward. "Don't come near," Mama shouted, clutching onto me. "Sarah Beth, make him leave, right now." "Mama, calm down," I said, not understanding anything. "He's hurt. He was just helping me outside." "You don't understand, daughter," she said, eyes filling with tears. "He's one of them." "One of who, Mama?" Thomas took another step, his hands raised like he was showing he meant no harm. "Mrs. Eleanor, I ain't what you're thinking. I came to help. John sent me." It was like lightning had struck right in the middle of our front room. Mama went white as a sheet, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. "My daddy?" I said, my voice shaking. "What do you know about my daddy?" Thomas looked at Mama, then at me. Seemed like he was deciding what to say. "You both better sit down," he finally said. "It's a long story." I helped Mama back to the rocking chair. She was shaking all over, her eyes fixed on Thomas. He stood in the middle of the room, not quite knowing where to place himself. "Talk," I demanded, my voice stronger than I felt. "What do you know about my daddy? Is he alive? Where is he? Why'd he never come back home?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Your daddy is alive. He's hiding out in Knoxville, and he sent me here to fetch both of you." I stood there frozen, staring at Thomas like he'd grown 2 heads. My daddy was alive? In Knoxville? And had sent this man to get us? "You're lying," I said, my voice coming out thin with emotion. "No, I ain't, Sarah Beth." Thomas looked me straight in the eyes in a way so sincere it made my stomach flip. "John is alive and wants to see you both, but he can't come back here himself. It's too dangerous. Mama let out a moan and hid her face in her hands. Her thin shoulders shook. She was crying. Mama. I knelt beside her. Did you know about this? Did you know Daddy was alive? She shook her head, unable to speak. After a while, she raised her tear-streaked face. I had my suspicions, she said, her voice breaking. I got a note about 6 months after he vanished. Just said, I'm all right. One day I'll return. Wasn't signed, but it was his handwriting. I felt anger rising in my chest. 3 years. For 3 years I'd thought my daddy was dead or had plain abandoned us. 3 years I'd spent taking care of everything by myself. The house, the crops, my sick mama. And he'd been alive the whole time? Why? I asked, looking at Thomas. Why did he run off? Why didn't he come back? Why didn't he send proper word? Thomas sat down on the wooden bench near the window. Seemed like he was choosing his words real careful. It's complicated, Sarah Beth. Has to do with your family's land and Judge Williams. Before he could explain more, we heard the sound of horses approaching the house. Thomas jumped up and hurried to the window, careful not to be seen from outside. Who is it? I asked, heart pounding. Judge's men, Thomas answered, face tight. 3 of them. Mama squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. They can't see you here, she told Thomas. Sarah Beth, take him to the cellar, quick. I never knew Mama still had the strength to speak like that, all bossy-like in the old days. The cellar was a small hole under the house where we kept potatoes and other food that needed to stay cool. The entrance was hidden by an old rug on the floor of the pantry. Come on, I said to Thomas, pulling him by his good arm. We ran to the pantry while the sound of horses grew louder. I pulled back the rug, revealing the wooden trapdoor. I opened it and showed him the makeshift ladder that went down into the darkness. Get down there and don't make a sound, I instructed. Don't come out until I come fetch you, understand? Thomas nodded and started climbing down. Before disappearing into the dark, he grabbed my wrist. Sarah Beth, don't tell them nothing, nothing at all. If they ask about me, say you never saw me. All right, I replied, closing the trapdoor and covering it with the rug again. I ran back to the front room. Mama had already fixed herself in the chair, smoothed her hair and wiped away her tears. Always amazed me how fast she could pull herself together, even being so sick. Sarah Beth, she whispered, let me do the talking. You keep quiet. The knocks on the door came hard and demanding. I took a deep breath and went to answer, trying to control the trembling in my hands. I opened just a crack, like I'd done the night before. On the other side were 3 men on horseback. I recognized the one in the middle right away. It was Silas, Judge Williams's foreman, a tall, skinny man with a thin mustache and small, hard eyes, had a reputation for being cruel to the workers on the judge's plantation. The other 2 were hired hands who always rode with him, men with grim faces and hands that never strayed far from the guns on their belts. Morning, Silas, I said, trying to sound calm. Miss Sarah, he replied, tipping his hat with fake politeness. He always called me Miss, even knowing full well I was just a girl. It was his way of mocking me. Mind if we come in? Got some business to discuss with you and your mama. I didn't want to let them in, but knew I had no choice. If I refused, they'd suspect something was wrong. Sure, I opened the door, stepping aside. Mama's in the front room. The 3 men walked in, their muddy boots leaving marks on my clean floor. The smell of sweat and horses filled the house. Silas went straight to where Mama sat. The other 2 hung back, looking around like they were searching for something. Mrs. Eleanor, Silas greeted, with that same fake smile. How are you feeling? Any better with your health? Mama nodded, serious. What brings you here, Silas? He sat in the chair across from her without being invited. You and your daughter holding up all right? That storm last night was a mighty bad one, wasn't it? We're fine, thank the Lord, Mama answered, not smiling. But you didn't come all the way out here to talk about the weather, did you now? Silas let out an uncomfortable little laugh. Always straight to the point, Mrs. Eleanor. That's why I respect you. He glanced at me, then back at Mama. Truth is, we're looking for a man. A stranger that was seen around these parts yesterday afternoon. I felt my blood run cold, but kept my face blank. What kind of man? Mama asked, sounding uninterested. Tall fellow, strong built, dark hair, wears traveler's clothes, probably injured. And why are you looking for this man? I asked, unable to help myself. Silas turned his head to me, eyes narrowed. He's a thief, stole money from Judge Williams and ran off. The judge is offering a good reward to anyone who helps find him. Lies. I knew it was lies. If Thomas was a thief, he would have robbed us during the night and disappeared. Besides, the way Silas talked, there was something false about it. We haven't seen nobody, I said, looking him straight in the eye. Stayed inside all night because of the storm. Silas studied me for a while, like he was trying to see if I was lying. Then he turned back to Mama. Mrs. Eleanor, you know Judge Williams has always had consideration for your family, right? Even after that disagreement with your husband. Mama didn't answer, her face a mask showing nothing. Would be a shame if you were hiding information, he continued. The judge would be disappointed. It was a barely disguised threat. Mama kept looking at him, calm as ever. Like I said, Silas, we haven't seen anyone. If someone shows up around here, we'll be sure to send word to the plantation. One of the men who had been inspecting the house came back to the room just then. There's blood on the kitchen floor, Silas, he said, pointing with his head. I felt my heart skip a beat. I'd completely forgotten that Thomas bled when I brought him inside last night. Silas got up slowly, a mean smile spreading across his face. Blood, you say? That's mighty interesting. He looked at me. And you said you didn't see nobody, isn't that right, Miss Sarah? My mind raced, searching for an excuse. It's chicken blood, I said, trying to sound natural. I killed one yesterday before the storm to make broth for Mama. Thought I'd cleaned it all up. Silas narrowed his eyes, suspicious. He stared at me for what felt like forever. Finally, he shrugged. If you say so. He put his hat back on. Well, we'll keep looking. If you see any strangers, you'd best let us know. The judge doesn't take kindly to being deceived. They left without another word. I stood in the doorway, watching them mount their horses and ride away down the path. Only when they disappeared from sight did I let my shoulders relax. My legs felt so weak they could hardly hold me up. I went back to the front room and found Mama with her face hidden in her hands again. They're gone, I said, sitting beside her. You think they believed us? Mama shook her head. No, Silas ain't no fool. He'll be back, and next time he'll tear this house apart. Then we need to leave here before that happens, a voice said from behind us. I turned with a start. It was Thomas, coming out of the cellar. I hadn't even heard him climb up. You shouldn't have come out, I snapped, angry. I heard everything, he explained, and Mrs. Eleanor's right. They'll be back, and soon. We've got to go, today. Go where? I asked, confused. To Knoxville, to your daddy. I looked at Mama, who seemed as lost as I was. Mama can't handle a trip like that, I argued. She's sick, can barely stand up. Staying here will be worse, Thomas insisted. Judge Williams won't give up, and it's not really me he's after. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a chill in my stomach. Thomas looked at Mama, like he was asking permission to speak. She nodded slowly. The judge wants your land, he explained. The land that belonged to your grandpa, your great-grandpa. And to get it, he'll do whatever it takes. That's why your daddy had to run, and that's why you two are in danger if you stay here. If you're feeling this story so far, don't forget to subscribe. I've got more real-life stories that'll hit you right in the heart. I know what it's like to face impossible choices and feel like the whole world's turned against you. Your struggles might look different from mine, But that feeling of being trapped with nowhere to turn? That's something we've all felt at one time or another. When I was 15, I thought I was alone in this world with these burdens. Now I know better, and that's why I share these stories, so you know you're never truly alone in your darkest hours. I sat there staring at Thomas, trying to make sense of everything he'd just said. Judge Williams wanted our land? That's why Daddy disappeared? But this doesn't make any sense, I said, shaking my head. Our land ain't worth nothing. It's just this little piece of farm, barely enough for us to live on. Thomas exchanged a look with Mama, like they were sharing a secret I didn't know. Sarah Beth, Mama said, her voice tired, there's things you don't know, things we never told you. What things, Mama? She sighed deep and pulled her shawl tighter around her bony shoulders. This farm is just a small piece of what used to be the Crescent Farm. Your great-grandpa Jeremiah Miller owned all the land from here to the river, more than 1,000 acres. My eyes went wide with disbelief. 1,000 acres? But how? Over time, the family lost most of it. Some because your grandpa drank and gambled too much. Another part because Judge Williams kept buying pieces, dirt cheap, when folks were desperate. Thomas, who was leaning against the wall listening, added, and other parts he just plain took. Moving boundary markers, forging papers, threatening people. My head was spinning with all this. I always thought we were poor, that we never had anything much. And now I was finding out my family once owned nearly everything around here? I still don't understand, I said. If we've already lost almost everything, why is the judge still coming after us? Why did Daddy have to run off? Mama looked at Thomas like she was asking for help. He came and sat near us, his face serious. Because your daddy discovered something, Sarah Beth. He found out the judge not only stole land from your family, but also hid something mighty valuable right here. What? Gold, Thomas said, lowering his voice even though nobody was around to hear. More than 100 years ago, during the Civil War, Confederate soldiers hid stolen gold in a cave that sits on your family's land. The judge found out by accident when he came across an old map. And my daddy knew about this? Your daddy found your grandpa's journal, Mama explained. In it, Jeremiah wrote about the hidden gold and gave clues to where the cave might be. When Judge Williams learned John had the journal, well, he wanted to get it by any means necessary. It was all starting to make sense. The strange men who used to show up at the farm before Daddy disappeared. The judge's insistent offers to buy our land, even though it was just a small, seemingly worthless piece. And where's this journal now? I asked. With your daddy, Thomas answered, in Knoxville. But there's a problem. He hesitated, like he didn't want to continue. What problem? The journal doesn't have all the information. There's a map that shows exactly where the cave is. And your daddy thinks that map is hidden somewhere here, in this house. I almost laughed. It all seemed so absurd. Hidden gold, secret maps, sounded like something from a dime novel, not real life, and especially not our simple life here. If there was a map like that here, I'd know about it, I said, suspicious. I know every inch of this house. We don't always know everything, Sarah Beth, Mama said, with a sad tone. Your daddy kept many secrets, things he hid even from me. I sat quiet, thinking. If what they were saying was true, we really were in danger. Judge Williams wasn't a man to give up easy on something he wanted, and if he thought we had the map... So that's why you came here? I asked Thomas. To get this map? He nodded. Your daddy sent me to get the map and both of you. He wants to bring the family back together, somewhere far from here, where the judge can't reach you. And the men who attacked you on the road? The judge's hired hands. They found out I was coming here and ambushed me. Lucky for me, I managed to get away, but not before taking a couple knife cuts. I looked at the bandage on his arm and felt a chill. Those men would have killed Thomas without thinking twice. And they'd do the same to us if they thought we were hiding the map. And how are we supposed to find this map? I asked. If my own daddy didn't know where it was, How will we know? Your daddy has some ideas, Thomas replied. He gave me clues about what to look for. Before he could say anything more, we heard a noise outside. Sounded like horses again. Thomas ran to the window and peeked out carefully. It's them again, he said, tense. And there's more this time. 5 or 6 men. My heart jumped into my throat. They'd come back so quick. What do we do? I asked, panic rising. You two get to the cellar, Thomas ordered. I'll handle them. No, I grabbed his arm. They'll hurt you, or worse. There's no other way, Sarah Beth. If they find you both here, they'll take you to the judge's plantation, and I don't know what might happen then. Mama, who'd been quiet until now, spoke with a surprisingly strong voice. There is another way. There's a secret passage that leads out to the back of the property, comes out in the middle of the bamboo thicket, near the creek. I looked at her, surprised. Secret passage? Since when? Since always, child. Your grandpa built it to hide during the Whiskey Rebellion. Your daddy and I never told you because we hoped we'd never need to use it. Thomas looked as surprised as I was. Where's this passage? In the cellar, Mama answered, already trying to stand. There's a hidden trap door under the potato sacks, leads to a tunnel that goes all the way to the bamboo thicket. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A secret passage under our house, and I never knew. How many other secrets was my family keeping? The horses were getting close now. We could hear men's voices. We didn't have much time. Let's go then, Thomas said, helping Mama to her feet. Quick, grab only what's really important. We need to be gone before they get here. I ran to my room and grabbed a small bundle. I put in a change of clothes, the picture of my daddy I kept under my pillow, and the silver locket my grandma gave me before she died. Didn't have much else worth taking. Mama was in her room, trying to gather a few things in a cloth bag. Her hands were shaking so bad she could hardly hold on to anything. I went to help her. Just the important things, Mama, I said gently. We can get the rest later. She nodded and handed me 3 items. The wooden rosary that had belonged to her mother, a yellowed photograph from her wedding day, and a small leather-bound book. What's this? I asked, holding the book. My mama's diary. Has recipes for home remedies. Might come in handy on the journey. I put everything in my bundle and went back to the front room. Thomas was at the window, counting the seconds. They're almost at the yard, he warned. We're out of time. We helped Mama to the kitchen, then to the pantry. I moved the rug aside and opened the trap door. Thomas went down first, then helped Mama down the steps. I came down last, closing the trap door behind me. The cellar was small and dark. It smelled of damp earth and potatoes. Thomas struck a match, lighting up the cramped space. Where's the passage? He whispered to Mama. She pointed to the corner where the potato sacks were stacked. Behind those sacks, there's a wooden trapdoor in the floor. Thomas moved the sacks carefully to avoid making noise. The old wood creaked a bit, but not much. Behind the sacks, just like Mama said, was a small wooden door, almost the same color as the dirt, well hidden. Right then, we heard heavy knocking on the front door, then angry voices. They'd arrived. Miss Sarah, Mrs. Eleanor, open up, it's the sheriff. It was a lie, of course. There was no sheriff, just the judge's men. But they wanted to scare us. Hurry, whispered Thomas, opening the secret door. A strong smell of wet earth rose from the dark hole that opened up. We could see the beginning of a low tunnel, where a person could only pass by crawling. Up above, we heard a loud crash. They were breaking down the front door. My heart was beating so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. You first, Thomas told Mama, helping her into the tunnel. She went in slowly, her weak body barely able to move in that tight space. I followed right after her, and Thomas came last, closing the hidden door. We were now in a tunnel dark as pitch, with no light at all. I'd never felt so scared in my whole life. We crawled through that dark tunnel for what felt like forever. The ground was packed dirt, damp and cold. Sometimes we'd feel a root or stone in the way. The air was heavy, hard to breathe. I followed right behind Mama, hearing her struggling breath. Thomas came last, carrying our few belongings on his back. The poor man must have been in pain with his injured arm, but he never complained once. "You doing all right, Mama?" I whispered, worried about how she was straining. "I'm managing," she answered between labored breaths. Behind us, Thomas would stop every so often to listen, trying to hear if we were being followed. But the only sounds were our own breathing and, far away, the muffled shouting of men tearing our house apart. "How much farther, Mama?" I asked after what seemed like hours of crawling. "Your Mama said the tunnel goes all the way to the bamboo thicket," Thomas answered for her. "Must be a good 100 yards or more." It seemed like an impossible distance in our condition. My Mama was getting slower with each passing minute, barely able to move forward. I was scared she wouldn't make it. "Let's rest a bit," I suggested, hearing how hard she was breathing. We stopped, and in the pitch darkness, I could only feel rather than see the others. Mama's breath was ragged, like each one took all her strength. "Sarah Beth," she said suddenly, her voice weak but determined. "There's something you need to know. About your daddy, about our family." "Now, Mama? Can it wait till we get out of here? I don't know if I'll make it to the end of this tunnel, child." I felt a tight squeeze in my chest. "Don't talk like that, Mama. Of course you'll make it." "Listen," she insisted. "What Thomas said about the gold is true. But there's more to it. Your daddy didn't run just because of the map or the gold. He ran because he discovered something worse about Judge Williams." "What, Mama?" "The judge. He killed your grandpa, your daddy's daddy." It was like being slapped in the face. My grandpa had died before I was born, and I'd always been told it was from heart troubles. "How? What are you talking about?" "Your grandpa wouldn't sell the land. No matter how hard things got, he refused. Then one day, he turned up dead. They said it was his heart, but your daddy never believed it. Years later, he found proof. One of the judge's men, drunk in a bar, talked too much. So that's why the judge wants to get Daddy? Because he knows the truth?" "Yes, and because your daddy swore he'd prove what happened and see justice done." I sat in silence, trying to take it all in. My family had owned all this land. There was gold hidden somewhere. My grandpa had been murdered. It was like I didn't know anything about my own history. "And the map?" I asked after a while. "Does it really exist?" "It does," Mama confirmed. "Your daddy believed it was hidden somewhere in the house, in a false wall under a floorboard, inside some old furniture. He searched for years but never found it. And he wants the map for what? The gold?" "Not just the gold," Thomas spoke up. "The map has markings that can prove the land was your family's, and it has notes from your great-grandpa that might help prove the judge's crime." I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. It was all too much to take in at once. "We should keep moving," I said, feeling that Mama had rested enough. "The sooner we get out of here, the better." We started crawling again. The tunnel seemed endless. My hands and knees were raw from scraping against the hard earth. Mama was moving slower and slower, stopping every few feet to catch her breath. Thomas kept encouraging us both, saying we were almost there. Suddenly, Thomas whispered, "I see light up ahead." I looked forward and saw it too, a faint grayish light far in the distance. The tunnel exit. I felt a wave of relief. "See, Mama? We're almost there." But she didn't answer. She had stopped moving altogether. "Mama?" I called, worried. "Mama, are you all right?" "Can't go further," she gasped, each word a struggle. My heart dropped. "Yes, you can, Mama. Look, we can see the way out. Just a little bit more." "Sarah, I can't." Thomas reached around me in the narrow space. "I'll pull her. You push from behind." That's what we did. I pushed my Mama gently from behind, while Thomas, ahead of her now, pulled her by the arms. Inch by painful inch, we moved toward that distant light. After what seemed like hours, we finally reached the exit of the tunnel. It was a small hole, covered with roots and bamboo leaves. Thomas cleared it away and crawled out first. "Coast is clear," he whispered back to us. "Come on." He reached in and helped pull Mama out. I came out last, blinking in the sudden daylight. We were in the middle of a thick bamboo grove, just as Mama had said. The tall bamboo stalks were so dense you could barely see through them. At least it gave us good cover. I laid Mama down on the ground. She was very pale, her lips almost blue, breathing with great difficulty. "Oh God," I said, frightened by how she looked. "She needs a doctor." "We can't take her to town," Thomas said, checking to see if anyone was nearby. "The judge has too much influence there." "Then what? We can't just let her die here." Thomas thought for a moment, scanning the area around us. "There's a place," he said after a while. "About 3 miles from here, near the old stagecoach road, there's a friend of your daddy's. Name's Robert Johnson. He helped your daddy escape back then. He's a trustworthy man." 3 miles? Mama can't walk that far. She can barely move. "I'll carry her," Thomas said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "With your injured arm, you can't." "I don't see we have much choice." I looked at my Mama lying on the ground. She was looking worse by the minute. The strain of the tunnel had been too much for her weak heart. Thomas was right. We had no choice. "I'll help you," I said. Thomas nodded and bent down to pick up Mama. Even with his injured arm, he managed to lift her onto his back. Mama was so thin from illness, she didn't weigh much at all. "Let's go," he said, adjusting her weight. "Stay behind the bamboo as long as we can." We started walking through the bamboo thicket, trying to stay hidden. The sun was high in the sky by now, must have been around noon. The heat was getting stronger, and soon we were all sweating. Thomas trudged forward, carrying Mama, and I came behind with our small bundle of belongings. The scythe I'd brought from the house was clutched tight in my hand, ready for any trouble. After a while, we left the cover of the bamboo and entered a more open area with scattered bushes and trees. We had to be more careful now. From here, someone might spot us if they were looking. Thomas kept going, never complaining, despite what must have been terrible pain in his injured arm. Sweat ran down his face, but he didn't slow down. Mama had fallen silent, her eyes closed, but at least she was still breathing. We walked for what seemed like forever. My feet were blistered in my worn-out shoes, and my throat was parched from thirst. The sun beat down mercilessly, but we kept going, knowing that stopping could mean death. After about 2 hours of walking, Thomas finally spoke. "It's just over that rise," he said, nodding toward a small hill ahead of us. "Robert's place." I felt a surge of hope. We were almost there. Mama would get help, and we'd be safe, at least for a while. As we crested the hill, I saw a small cabin in a clearing, surrounded by a few trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign that someone was home. It looked peaceful, ordinary. The kind of place you'd never think to look for fugitives. We were about halfway down the hill when I heard it, the sound of horses behind us. My blood ran cold. I turned to look. "Thomas," I whispered in terror. "They found us." 2 riders were coming fast along the path we'd just traveled. Even from a distance, I recognized Silas's tall, lean figure. They must have found the tunnel exit and followed our trail. "Run!" Thomas commanded, suddenly moving faster despite his burden. "Run to the cabin. Tell Robert who you are. He'll help." "What about you and Mama?" "I'll be right behind you. Now go." I took off, running down the hill toward the cabin. My legs felt like lead, but fear gave me speed I didn't know I had. Behind me, I could hear the horses getting closer. When I reached the cabin door, I pounded on it with all my might. "Help! Please help us!" The door swung open. An older man with white hair and a weathered face stood there, a shotgun in his hands. "Who are you, girl?" he demanded. "I'm Sarah Beth Miller," I gasped out. "John Miller's daughter. Please, my Mama's sick, and men are chasing us." Recognition flashed in the old man's eyes. He looked past me to where Thomas was stumbling down the hill, still carrying Mama, with the riders closing in fast. "Get inside," he ordered, raising his shotgun. "Now!" I rushed inside the cabin while Robert stood in the doorway, shotgun raised. Through the window, I watched Thomas stumbling down the hill, still carrying Mama. Silas and his man were closing in fast, maybe 50 yards behind him. "Stop right there!" Robert shouted, aiming the shotgun at the riders. "This is private property!" Silas and his companion reined in their horses, stopping about 30 yards away. They clearly hadn't expected armed resistance. "We've got business with those folks," Silas called back, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Judge Williams' business." "And I've got business with this shotgun," Robert replied calmly. "2 barrels of business, to be exact. Now turn around and get off my land before I decide to show you just how serious I am." There was a tense moment when I thought Silas might draw his gun. But apparently, he wasn't willing to risk it. With a nod to his companion, they turned their horses and rode back the way they came. "This ain't over, old man," Silas shouted over his shoulder. "Judge'll hear about this." Robert didn't lower the shotgun until they disappeared from view. Then he hurried down to help Thomas, who had nearly reached the cabin, legs trembling with exhaustion. "Get inside, quick," Robert said, taking Mama from Thomas's back. "They'll be back with more men." Inside the cabin, Robert gently laid Mama on a bed in the corner. She looked awful, her face ashen, breathing shallow and irregular. I knelt beside her, taking her cold hand in mine. "Mama, can you hear me?" She opened her eyes just a crack. "Sarah Beth," she whispered, barely audible. "She needs medicine," I said, looking up at Robert desperately. "Her heart's real bad." Robert nodded. "I've got some herbs that might help. Used to be a medic in the war. Know a thing or two about healing." He went to a shelf and took down several jars of dried herbs and roots. Working quickly, he crushed some together in a wooden bowl, then added hot water from the kettle that had been sitting on his wood stove. "This should ease her breathing some," he explained, bringing the steaming bowl over. "Help her sit up a bit." I carefully lifted Mama's head and shoulders while Robert held the bowl under her nose. The steam had a strong, medicinal smell. After a few minutes of breathing it in, Mama's breathing seemed to ease a little. "That's good," Robert said, setting the bowl aside. "Now we need to get some of this tea into her." He poured some of the herbal mixture into a cup. "It's bitter, but it'll help her heart." With my help, Mama managed to sip a little of the tea. After she drank about half the cup, she lay back, exhausted. "Rest now," Robert told her gently. Then to me and Thomas, "Come on, let's talk where we won't disturb her." We moved to the other side of the one-room cabin. Robert spoke in a low voice. "John sent word you might be coming. Got his letter about a week ago. Said to expect his friend Thomas with his wife and daughter. Said you might be in trouble." "We are," Thomas confirmed. "Judge Williams's men are after us. Burned down their house, hunting for a map." Robert's weathered face grew solemn. "John told me about that map, and about what the judge did to his father." "Is my daddy really in Knoxville?" I asked. "He is. Been there about 3 years now. Started a new life, but he never forgot about you and your mama. Sent me money regular to keep an eye on you from a distance." That information hit me hard. All this time, Daddy had been watching over us, in his way. Maybe he hadn't abandoned us completely after all. "How bad is her condition?" Robert asked, glancing toward Mama. Thomas and I exchanged worried looks. "Bad," I admitted. "The doctor in town said her heart's failing, and all this strain. The escape through the tunnel. She needs a real doctor," Thomas added, "but we can't risk going to town." Robert thought for a moment. "I've got a friend in Chattanooga. Used to be a doctor before he lost his license for treating colored folks same as whites. He'd help, no questions asked." "Chattanooga's far," I said. "How would we get there?" I've got an old truck out back. Doesn't look like much, but it runs. Could take you part way at least. Hope flickered inside me. If we could get Mama to a real doctor, maybe she'd have a chance. When could we leave? Thomas asked. Not today, Robert replied. Silas and his boys will be watching the roads. We need to wait till dark, maybe even till tomorrow night. Give them time to ease up a bit. The thought of waiting that long worried me, but I knew Robert was right. Trying to leave now would be too dangerous. What about the judge? I asked. If he knows where we are. My place is off the main roads, Robert explained, and I've got friends nearby who'd warn me if a bunch of riders were coming this way. We'll have time to get out if we need to. I nodded, feeling a little better. Then another thought struck me. The map, I said suddenly. What if... I hurried over to our small bundle of belongings and pulled out the leather-bound book Mama had insisted on bringing, my grandmother's diary. With trembling hands, I opened it and began carefully examining each page, feeling along the binding, the covers. What are you doing? Thomas asked, coming to watch. Mama insisted on bringing this, I explained. Said it was important, had her Mama's remedies, but what if there's more to it? I kept examining the book until I noticed something odd. The back cover seemed thicker than it should be. Pressing my fingers along the edges, I felt a slight separation in the leather. There's something in here, I said, my heart racing. With careful fingers, I pried at the edge of the back cover. Slowly, the leather separated, revealing a hidden pocket. And inside that pocket was a folded piece of yellowed paper. My hands shook as I pulled it out and unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn in faded ink, showing the area around our farm. There were markings, notes in the margins, and a big X drawn over a spot near the creek that ran through our property. "Oh my God," Thomas whispered, looking over my shoulder. "You found it." Robert came over, eyes wide. "The map John's been searching for all these years. It was in your grandma's book this whole time." I stared at the map in wonder. The thing that had caused so much trouble, so much heartache, here it was in my hands. On the back, just as Thomas had said, there were notes written in a spidery hand, my great-grandpa's writing, describing the original boundaries of our land and how the judge's father had begun taking it by force. "Mama knew," I said softly, looking at her sleeping form. "She must have known all along where it was, but she never told anyone, not even Daddy." "Your mama's a smart woman," Robert said. "Probably figured it was safer that way. The less people knew, the less danger you all were in." Thomas studied the map carefully. "This is it. This is what we need. With this, your daddy can prove the judge's crimes, both the land theft and possibly even your grandpa's murder." I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief at finding the map, anger that so much suffering had come from it, and worry about what would happen next. "So now what?" I asked. "We just wait until tomorrow night and try to make it to Chattanooga?" "That's the plan," Robert confirmed. "Get your mama to my doctor friend, then figure out how to get you all to Knoxville, to your daddy." The mention of my daddy brought back what Thomas had told me, that he had a new family now, a woman named Mary, and even a child, my half-brother. I still didn't know how I felt about that. Part of me was angry, another part understood that he thought he could never come back to us. But what would happen when Mama found out? Would it break her already weak heart? "Your daddy will be mighty happy to see you," Robert said, misreading my expression. "He talks about you in every letter he sends." I nodded but didn't reply. Instead, I went back to sit by Mama's side. Her breathing seemed a little easier now, thanks to Robert's medicine. I took her hand and held it tight, drawing comfort from its familiar feel despite how frail it had become. That night, we took turns watching over Mama and keeping an eye out for the judge's men. Thomas took first watch, then Robert, then me. I sat by the window in the pale moonlight, listening to the night sounds and thinking about everything that had happened. In just 2 days, my whole world had been turned upside down. Our house was gone, burned to the ground. We were fugitives, hunted by the most powerful man in the county. Mama was hovering between life and death, and soon we'd be heading to Knoxville, to a father I hadn't seen in 3 years, who now had a new family. But something else had changed, too. For the first time, I understood who I really was, where I came from. I wasn't just a poor farm girl struggling to survive. I was the great-granddaughter of Jeremiah Miller, a man who had once owned 1,000 acres. I came from people who built secret tunnels and hid maps and fought for what was theirs. There was strength in my blood, a heritage of courage and determination. As the first light of dawn broke over the hills, I made a promise to myself. No matter what happened next, I would be worthy of that heritage. I would protect my mama, I would face my daddy and his new family, and somehow, someday, I would see justice done for all that had been taken from us. He didn't just have one son, he had 2, maybe more. If you want to hear more stories like this, go ahead and subscribe now. When life changes in the blink of an eye, you need to hold on tight to what matters most. That's what I had to learn at 15, watching my mama fight for every breath, clutching a map that held our family's past and future. Sometimes the hardest moments are what shape us into who we're meant to be. I never would have chosen this path, but looking back, I can see how each step, even the painful ones, led me exactly where I needed to go. 2 days after our escape, I was sitting on Robert's porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. I'd barely slept, worrying about Mama, who was still mighty weak. Robert's herbal remedies had helped some, but she needed a real doctor, no question about it. Thomas came out of the cabin and sat down beside me. He'd changed the bandages on his arm and seemed to be healing up good, though he still moved careful-like. "How you holding up?" he asked, offering me a cup of coffee. "I'm managing," I answered, taking the coffee. "What about you?" "Arm's getting better. Robert's got away with them herbs. Helped quite a bit." We sat quiet for a spell, each lost in our own thoughts. Finding that pocket watch with the picture of my daddy and Thomas had changed everything. Now I knew Thomas was my daddy's cousin, that they'd grown up together, and that my daddy was indeed alive, hiding out in Knoxville. "What are we going to do now?" I finally asked. "Mama's in no shape to travel all the way to Knoxville." Thomas took a sip of coffee before answering. "Robert went into town last night, disguised himself good. He hung around the tavern, listening to what folks were saying." "And what did he find out?" "The judge is fit to be tied. Has men on every road in the county. They're stopping anybody who passes through, asking if they've seen us. The story he spread is that we stole money from him and burned down our own house to cover the crime." My blood started to boil. "That's a lie. He's the one who had our house burned." "I know," Thomas said, putting his hand on my shoulder to calm me. "But it's his word against ours. And round these parts, Judge Williams's word carries more weight than just about anyone's." It was true. The judge had the whole county in his pocket. The sheriff, the mayor, even the preacher. Nobody would stand against him. "So we're stuck here," I said, feeling defeated. "Can't leave, can't get a doctor for Mama, can't do nothing." "It ain't quite that bad," Thomas replied. "There's a way out, but it's gonna be risky." "What way?" "Robert's got a friend who drives a delivery truck. He comes through here tomorrow, taking a load of produce down to Chattanooga. If we can get on that truck without nobody seeing, he can drop us near the road to Knoxville." It was a dangerous plan. If we got caught trying to escape, the judge would show no mercy. And Mama, in the state she was in. "Mama won't survive that trip," I said, shaking my head. "She can barely sit up in bed. Robert knows a doctor in Chattanooga who's helped folks in our situation before. If we can get there, your Mama can get proper treatment." I thought it over. Staying put was dangerous too. Any moment, the judge's men might discover where we were hiding, and Mama desperately needed medical care. "All right," I agreed at last. "But how do we manage with Mama being so weak?" "We'll make a stretcher with blankets. Robert's got an old cart in the back of his property. We can use it to carry your Mama to where the truck will stop." There were so many risks, But we didn't have many options. Robert couldn't hide us forever, and the longer we stayed, the more danger we put him in too. "What about that map that Daddy wants so bad?" I asked. "We're just leaving without it?" Thomas sighed. "The map, if it exists, was in your house, and now the house is gone." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. Our home, our belongings, our memories, all turned to ashes, and possibly the map that could have proved everything and brought justice was gone too. "Maybe it wasn't in the house," I said, an idea suddenly forming. "What if—" I stopped talking when I saw Robert coming up the path from the direction of the road. He looked worried. "Get inside, quick," he called out, still some ways off. "Riders coming!" We rushed into the cabin. Thomas grabbed the shotgun that was leaning against the wall and went to the window to look out. "Who is it?" I asked, heart pounding. "Two riders," he answered, tense. "Coming up the main road." "Judge's men?" "Can't tell for sure. They're still a ways off." Robert hurried through the door. "Hide in the root cellar," he said, opening a trap door in the floor that I hadn't even noticed before. "Quick now!" "What about Mama?" I asked, looking toward the bed where she lay sleeping. "I'll say she's my sister, took sick visiting," Robert said. "Now go, both of you." We climbed down a short ladder into a small, dark root cellar, much like the one at our house. Thomas led the way, still holding the shotgun. I followed, trembling with fear. The root cellar was damp and smelled of earth and stored vegetables. There were shelves with jars of preserves and sacks of food. A tight space, but enough to hide in. Robert closed the trapdoor over us, and we heard him dragging something heavy across it, probably to hide the entrance. We stayed there in silence, barely breathing, listening to the footsteps above our heads. Minutes later, we heard loud knocking at the cabin door. Men's voices, speaking harsh. Robert answering, his voice calm. We couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was threatening. Thomas gripped the shotgun tighter, ready to shoot if needed. I prayed silently, just like Mama had taught me when I was little. The footsteps overhead moved back and forth. They were searching the cabin. At one point, we heard steps right above our hiding spot. We held our breath. If they discovered the trap door. But the steps moved on. After what seemed like forever, we heard the front door slam shut. More time passed before the trapdoor finally opened and Robert's face appeared. "They're gone," he told us. "For now." We climbed out of the root cellar. I ran straight to check on Mama. She was still in bed, looking frightened but awake. "Who was it?" Thomas asked Robert. "Two of the judges hired guns. Not Silas this time, but men just as mean. Said they were looking for fugitives wanted for theft and arson." "What did you tell them?" "Said I hadn't seen nobody matching your description. But they didn't believe me much. Searched the whole place, except they didn't look too close at your Mama. Told them she was my sister, down with a contagious fever. That kept them away from her bed." "Will they be back?" I asked, still scared. "Most likely. Said they're searching every property in the county. Judge's orders are to leave no stone unturned until they find you." Things were getting worse by the hour. The noose was tightening around us. If we didn't leave soon, we'd surely be caught. "Your friend with the truck," I said to Robert. "Any chance he could come earlier?" Robert shook his head. "No way to get word to him. We ain't got no telephone here, and it'd be too risky to send someone to town with a message." "So we have to hold out till tomorrow," Thomas concluded, "and pray they don't come back before then." "And if they do come back?" I asked. "Then we fight," Thomas answered, his voice dead serious. "I won't let them take us to the judge." The rest of the day was tense. Every little noise outside made us jump. Robert kept watch from the window, taking turns with Thomas. I stayed by Mama's side, who seemed a bit better after taking more of Robert's herbal medicine. As night fell, Robert cooked a simple stew of rabbit and potatoes. While we ate, Thomas explained the plan for the next day. "The truck will stop at the crossroads just after dawn," he said. "We'll need to leave here before first light, using Robert's cart to carry your Mama. It's about a mile to the crossroads, through the woods mostly, to stay out of sight. It was a risky plan, full of things that could go wrong. But we had no choice. Staying put meant certain capture, sooner or later. "Will the truck driver be willing to take us?" I asked. "Won't he be scared of getting in trouble?" "Jim's an old friend," Robert explained. "Fought alongside your grandpa in the war. He hates the judge almost as much as we do. He'll help us, no questions asked." As night deepened, we took turns standing watch. Robert first, then Thomas, and finally me. During my watch, I sat by the window, looking out at the moonlit clearing, listening for any sign of approaching riders. My mind wandered to everything that had happened. Just days ago, I was a simple farm girl, caring for my sick mama, tending our little piece of land. Now, our house was burned down, we were on the run, and I'd discovered secrets about my family I never imagined. Thomas had told me that in Knoxville, I'd meet my half-brother, a little boy of just 2 years old. I still didn't know how I felt about that. The idea of my daddy with another family, while Mama and I struggled alone, still made my heart hurt something fierce. But I was beginning to understand that life ain't always simple, that good people sometimes make choices that hurt others, even when they don't mean to. As the first hint of dawn showed on the horizon, I woke Thomas and Robert. It was time to prepare for our journey. "How's Mama?" I asked Robert after he checked on her. "Stable," he answered. "Not better, but not worse neither. The herbs are keeping her heart steady, but she needs real medicine, and soon." We gathered our few belongings. Robert had packed a sack with food and water for the journey, plus more of his herbal medicine for Mama. Thomas and Robert fashioned a stretcher from blankets and 2 sturdy poles. Gently, we moved Mama onto it. "Sarah Beth," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Where are we going?" "To a doctor, Mama," I answered, holding her hand. "And then to see Daddy." A faint smile touched her lips before her eyes closed again. She was too weak to stay awake for long. Just as the sky began to lighten in the east, we were ready. Robert had hitched his old mule to the cart, and we carefully placed Mama's stretcher in the back, covering her with more blankets. It was chilly in the pre-dawn air, and she needed to stay warm. "Stay on the forest path," Robert instructed as we prepared to leave. "It's longer, but you'll be hidden from the main road. Jim will wait at the crossroads until he sees you." "What about you?" I asked, suddenly worried for this kind man who had risked so much to help us. "Won't the judge's men come back and hurt you for helping us?" Robert smiled, a grim but determined expression. "Let them come. I'm too old to run, and I ain't afraid of the judge or his hired guns. Besides, I owe it to your daddy and your grandpa. They were good men, the best I ever knew." With those words, he helped me up onto the cart beside Mama. Thomas took the reins, and with a final nod to Robert, we set off into the dim forest, toward the crossroads where we hoped salvation awaited. The sky had barely started to lighten when we set off down the forest path. Thomas led the mule at a slow, careful pace so the cart wouldn't jostle Mama too much. I sat in the back with her, holding her hand and making sure the blankets kept her warm in the chilly morning air. Every bump in the path made me wince, knowing how fragile she was. "How much farther?" I whispered to Thomas after we'd been traveling for what felt like hours, though the sun had only just cleared the horizon. "Not far now," he answered, keeping his voice low. "Maybe half a mile more." The forest path was overgrown in spots, forcing Thomas to clear branches that hung too low. We moved as quietly as possible, always listening for any sound of horses or men that might spell danger. The only noises were the creak of the cart wheels, the soft clip-clop of the mule's hooves, and the morning birds singing in the trees. Mama drifted in and out of consciousness. When she was awake, her eyes would find mine, and she'd try to smile, though I could see the pain she was in. I kept giving her sips of water and small doses of Robert's herbal medicine, praying it would keep her stable until we reached the doctor in Chattanooga. "Thomas," I said after a while, needing to ask something that had been weighing on me. Is he happy in Knoxville?" Thomas glanced back at me, his face thoughtful. He's found a kind of peace, I suppose. But he ain't never been truly happy, not since he had to leave you and your mama. That's why he sent me to find you. He wants his family whole again. Even with the other woman and child? Thomas sighed. Mary's a good woman, Sarah Beth. She helped your daddy when he was at his lowest. And little Johnny? Well, he's just an innocent child. I nodded, trying to make peace with the idea of this new family. It wasn't the boy's fault, that was certain. And maybe this Mary wasn't to blame either. Life had forced all of us into situations none of us would have chosen. There it is, Thomas said suddenly, pointing ahead. The crossroads. Through the trees, I could see where two dirt roads met. Parked at the intersection was an old truck, its engine off, a man leaning against the front. This must be Jim, Robert's friend who was going to take us to Chattanooga. Stay here with your mama, Thomas instructed. I'll make sure it's safe. He moved ahead cautiously, the shotgun ready in his hands. When he was about 50 yards from the truck, he gave a low whistle. The man turned, spotted Thomas, and raised his hand in greeting. It's all right, Thomas called back to me. It's Jim. Relief flooded through me. The first part of our plan had worked. Now we just needed to get Mama safely loaded into the truck and away from here before anyone spotted us. Thomas and Jim spoke briefly, then both came back to help with the cart. Jim was a big man with graying hair and a thick beard. His hands were rough and calloused, but gentle as he helped lift Mama's stretcher. This your mama? He asked me softly. Robert said she was in a bad way. Yes, sir, I replied. Her heart's weak. She needs a real doctor. My brother-in-law in Chattanooga will help her, Jim assured me. He's a good man, trained in Charleston before the war, knows his medicine. Together, the three of us carefully transferred Mama from the cart to the back of the truck. The truck bed was half filled with crates of vegetables, creating a space in the middle where we could lay the stretcher. Jim had lined it with blankets to make it as comfortable as possible. You'll have to ride back here with her, Jim explained. Stay low, under this tarp. I've got a checkpoint to pass through about 10 miles down the road. Judge's men checking all vehicles. My heart skipped a beat. Will they search the truck? Not likely. They know me, see me every week on this route. But still, best you stay hidden and quiet. Thomas helped me climb into the truck bed beside Mama. Then Jim covered us with a large canvas tarp, arranging some empty crates on top to make it look natural. It was dark under there and stuffy, but at least we were hidden. I'll be right up front with Jim, Thomas told me through the tarp. If there's any trouble, you stay put, you hear? No matter what happens. I understand, I whispered, though the thought of trouble made my stomach knot with fear. The truck engine roared to life, startlingly loud after the quiet of the forest. We began to move, bouncing along the rough country road. I held onto Mama's stretcher to keep it from sliding around, whispering reassurances whenever she stirred. The journey was long and uncomfortable. The heat under the tarp grew as the morning sun rose higher, making it hard to breathe. Mama's condition seemed stable, but I worried the heat might make her worse. After what felt like hours, the truck slowed and then stopped. My heart pounded as I heard voices outside, gruff, official-sounding men talking to Jim. They were asking questions, where he was coming from, where he was headed. Jim answered casually, like it was just another day on his delivery route. Mind if we take a look at your cargo? One of the men asked. Help yourself, Jim replied easily. Just vegetables from the Valley Farms, heading to market in Chattanooga. I held my breath as footsteps approached the back of the truck. The tarp lifted slightly at one corner, and I caught a glimpse of a man's hand and part of his arm. He was checking the crates, but not moving them. After a moment, the tarp dropped back into place. All clear, the man called out. Move along. The engine started up again, and we continued on our way. I let out the breath I'd been holding, relief washing over me. We'd made it past the checkpoint. The truck picked up speed on what must have been a better road. We drove for another couple of hours before slowing again. This time, when we stopped, it was Thomas who lifted the tarp. We're outside Chattanooga, he said, helping me sit up. Jim's brother-in-law lives just up this road. We're going to take your mama there now." I looked around, blinking in the sudden bright light. We were on a small side road, with trees providing cover from the main highway. Nearby stood a modest 2-story house with a wide porch. Jim came around to the back of the truck. "That's Doc Wilson's place," he said, nodding toward the house. "He's expecting us. Robert sent word with a neighbor who was heading this way yesterday." Together, we carefully lifted Mama's stretcher from the truck and carried her toward the house. Before we even reached the steps, the front door opened, and a tall, thin man with spectacles came out. "Bring her in," he said without preamble. "I've got a room ready." Inside, the house was clean and smelled of medicinal herbs. Doc Wilson led us to a small bedroom on the first floor, where we laid Mama on a real bed with clean sheets. She stirred slightly, but didn't fully wake. Doc Wilson checked her over immediately, listening to her heart with a stethoscope, taking her pulse, examining her eyes and skin color. "How long has she been like this?" he asked me. "She's been sick for nearly a year," I explained. "But got much worse these past few days. We had to escape through a tunnel, then ride in a cart, then under that tarp in the truck." He nodded, understanding. "Her heart is very weak, but it's still fighting. I'll give her some medicine that should help strengthen it, at least enough for her to travel to Knoxville." "She'll be all right?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "I can't promise that," Doc Wilson said honestly. "But I can make her more comfortable and give her a fighting chance. The rest is up to her. And the good Lord." That afternoon, Mama received real medicine for the first time in months. Doc Wilson gave her something to strengthen her heart, something else for the pain, and a special tea to help her rest. By evening, there was a bit more color in her cheeks, and her breathing seemed easier. Jim had to continue on his delivery route, but promised to check on us on his way back the next day. Thomas and I took turns sitting with Mama while the other rested. Doc Wilson's wife, a kind woman named Martha, brought us food and clean clothes. That night, sitting beside Mama's bed while she slept peacefully, I took out the map we'd found in Grandma's diary. In the lamplight, I studied the careful drawings, the notes in the margins, the big X marking the cave where the Confederate gold was supposedly hidden. It seemed almost unreal that this piece of paper had caused so much trouble, had changed all our lives so dramatically. "Is that it?" Thomas asked, coming into the room quietly. "The map?" "Yes," I replied, carefully folding it again. "Funny how something so small can cause so much pain." "It ain't the map itself," Thomas said, sitting beside me. "It's what it represents. Proof of what the judge and his daddy stole from your family. Proof of their crimes. Do you really think it can help us get justice? After all this time?" "Your daddy thinks so, and I trust his judgment." I nodded, tucking the map safely away. "When will we leave for Knoxville?" "Tomorrow, if your mama's strong enough. Doc Wilson knows a man with an automobile who can take us most of the way. It's safer than the trains or buses, where the judge might have people watching." The next morning, Mama was awake and alert for the first time in days. The medicine had worked wonders. She was still weak, but her eyes were clear, and she managed to eat a little breakfast. "Where are we?" she asked, looking around the unfamiliar room. "At a doctor's house near Chattanooga," I explained. "He's helped you get stronger, and soon we're going to Knoxville to see Daddy." She nodded slowly. "I had dreams about your father. I saw him clear as day, smiling just like he used to." I held her hand, not knowing what to say. Did she somehow sense the truth about Daddy's new life? Or were they just dreams of better days? By noon, Doc Wilson declared Mama fit enough to travel, though she'd need to continue taking the medicine he provided. The man with the automobile arrived, a sleek black Ford that looked fast and reliable. "This is Mr. Daniels," Doc Wilson introduced us. "He'll take you as far as the outskirts of Knoxville. Your daddy can meet you there." Thomas had already sent word ahead through Doc Wilson's telephone, letting my daddy know we were coming and where to meet us. It felt strange, knowing that in just a few hours I'd be seeing him again after 3 long years. As we helped Mama into the back seat of the automobile, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Fear, hope, anger, excitement, uncertainty. They all swirled together in my chest. We were leaving behind the only home I'd ever known, heading toward a new life with people I didn't know. But we were also moving toward safety, toward healing, and maybe even toward justice. Mr. Daniels started the engine, and we pulled away from Doc Wilson's house, beginning the final leg of our journey. I looked back once at the little house that had been our sanctuary, where Mama had received the care she so desperately needed. Then I faced forward, toward Knoxville, toward my daddy, toward whatever future awaited us there. Today, 55 years after that night in the automobile heading to Knoxville, I sit by my window in my home in Nashville and watch the rain fall, just like it did when Thomas knocked on our door. Life has taken so many twists and turns that sometimes I hardly recognize myself as that frightened 15-year-old girl running for her life with her sick mama. The drive to Knoxville was difficult. Mama grew weaker along the way, her breathing becoming shallow again, despite Doc Wilson's medicine. When we finally reached the meeting spot, a small diner on the outskirts of town, I was terrified she wouldn't make it. I'll never forget the moment I saw my daddy after 3 long years. He was waiting in the parking lot, pacing back and forth. He'd aged considerably, his hair almost all gray, new lines etched deep in his face. When he saw our car pull up, he froze like he'd seen a ghost. Then he ran to us as Mr. Daniels stopped the automobile. "Eleanor," he whispered, tears streaming down his face as he saw Mama lying in the back seat, barely conscious. "My God, what happened to you?" Mama just smiled faintly and closed her eyes. We rushed her to the hospital where Daddy had already arranged for a doctor friend to be waiting. They took her straight in, while we sat in the hallway, anxious and exhausted. Only after Mama was settled did we have time to really talk. Daddy hugged me tight, apologizing over and over for leaving, for not finding a way to bring us to him sooner, for everything that had happened. "I never wanted to leave you, Sarah Beth," he said, his voice breaking. "You gotta believe that. I thought I was protecting you and your mama by staying away." It was then that I met Mary, the woman who had become part of Daddy's new life. She came to the hospital bringing food and fresh clothes for us. She wasn't what I expected, not young and pretty like I'd imagined, but a kind-faced woman about my daddy's age with gentle eyes and a soft voice. And with her was little Johnny, my half-brother, just 2 years old with my daddy's dark eyes. I won't lie. At first it was hard. Hard to accept this new family. Hard to understand how Daddy could have built a life without us, while Mama and I struggled alone. But as the days passed, I began to see things differently. Mama hovered between life and death for weeks. The doctors did everything they could, but her heart had been weakened beyond repair by the strain of our escape and the journey. One evening, she called me to her bedside. "Sarah Beth," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "I want you to know something. I don't blame your daddy for what happened. He did what he thought was right to protect us." "But he left us, Mama," I replied, still holding on to some of my anger. "He started a new family." She smiled sadly. "Life's rarely simple, child. Sometimes good people make mistakes or get caught in impossible situations. Forgiveness isn't just for them, it's for you too. Carrying anger is too heavy a burden." Those were some of the last words she spoke to me. That night, peacefully in her sleep, Mama passed away. She was just 42 years old. The funeral was small, just family and a few of Daddy's trusted friends. Mary was there, standing beside me, holding my hand when it all became too much. Despite everything, I was grateful for her kindness. With the map from Grandma's diary, Daddy finally had what he needed to prove the judge's crimes. He contacted a lawyer friend who started building a case against Judge Williams. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about justice for Mama, for Grandpa, for all the people the judge had hurt over the years. The legal battle took years. Judge Williams fought with everything he had, using his money and influence to delay and obstruct. But times were changing in Tennessee. The old power structures were weakening, and people were less willing to look the other way for powerful men who abused their position. When I was 25, 10 years after our escape, the verdict finally came down. The court ruled in our favor, ordering the return of the lands that had been illegally taken, along with damages for the years of lost use. More importantly, the evidence my daddy had collected about Grandpa's murder was accepted, and Judge Williams was indicted for conspiracy to commit murder. It caused a huge scandal throughout the county. The mighty judge, who had ruled like a king for decades, now stood accused in open court. Many people who had suffered at his hands finally found the courage to speak out. The stories that emerged were chilling, tales of threats, violence, theft, and worse. The judge was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He never served the full term. He died behind bars 3 years later, old and sick, abandoned by the yes-men who had once surrounded him. As for the Confederate gold that had started it all, well, that's another story. After we reclaimed our family lands, Daddy organized an expedition to the cave marked on the map. They did find several old chests with gold coins and artifacts from Civil War times. It wasn't the massive fortune legends had described, but it was enough to give our family a fresh start. My mama lived just long enough to know we'd be okay, but not long enough to see justice done. I like to think she knows somehow that she found peace in the knowledge that the truth eventually came to light. Thomas and I got married 5 years after our escape. Who would have thought that the injured stranger who knocked on our door that stormy night would become the love of my life? We had 3 children together who are all grown now with families of their own. My oldest son, Joseph, manages the restored Crescent Farm, which we rebuilt on our reclaimed family lands. Daddy passed away 10 years ago at the age of 85. Mary followed 2 years later. Little Johnny, not so little anymore, is 55 now and runs a successful business in Knoxville. Life has a way of coming full circle, doesn't it? So many twists and turns, joys and sorrows. If someone had told me on that stormy night when I was 15 that everything would turn out this way, I never would have believed them. What have I learned through all of this? That life doesn't come with a roadmap. That sometimes the people we love most make decisions that hurt us, even when they don't mean to. That there are few true villains or heroes in this world, mostly just people trying their best in difficult situations. And most importantly, that time heals many wounds if we let it. Today, at 70 years old, I look back and see how each difficult moment taught me something valuable. That frightened girl of 15 grew up, faced her fears, built a good life despite everything. And perhaps that's the greatest victory, not letting the hardships define me, but rather what I did with them. In the end, we did find justice, though it came at a terrible cost. My mama, my sweet, patient mama, never lived to see the judge pay for his crimes or our family land restored. But her sacrifice wasn't in vain. Her courage, her wisdom, her love, they live on in me, in my children, in my grandchildren. Sometimes on rainy nights like this one, I sit by the window and think I can almost see her, smiling at what her family has become. I think she'd be proud of how things turned out, even though the path was harder and longer than any of us could have imagined. And that's my story, friends. A tale of loss and love, of justice long delayed, but finally delivered, of family torn apart and somehow pieced back together in a new way. I've been blessed to live long enough to see how it all worked out, to find peace with the past and joy in the present. I survived the lie, and I found peace. If this story touched you, hit subscribe. Let's keep these real voices alive. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Leave a comment below and let me know what part of the country you call home. It means the world to know we're connected through these stories, no matter how far apart we might be.